UJA-JCC. Thank you for being here. This is the second to last of the Confronting Anti-Semitism program for winter and spring, and we are hoping to reconvene maybe when the weather gets a little cooler and you all want to be back on Zoom in October and November. So keep your eyes peeled for any programming that gets developed over the summer. And I'm going to turn the program over to Laura Blum, our program director. I would say to you that when our speaker is ready for questions, there are two ways you can ask questions. You can unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat and one of us will alert her to the questions. While she is sharing her screen, she will not be able to see your questions. So we will handle that if something comes up during the presentation. So over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thanks, of course, to Lois and Bruce Zenkel for the very generous support of this series. It is my pleasure to introduce Judith Cohen. Judith was Chief Acquisitions Curator of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum before retiring this past November. She'd come to the museum 25 years earlier to work on an exhibition called Hidden History of the Kovno Ghetto. Soon enough, the Harvard and Brandeis grad was snapped up by the museum's photo archives, where she served as director before ascending the ranks to run the curatorial acquisitions and reference branch. Judith's many elucidations of the museum collection included curating web exhibits and writing articles. Here are 5 of the titles: Memento Mori, Photographs from the Grave; 3 Approaches to Exploring the Hoker Album; Jewish Ghetto Photographers, the Mantello Rescue Mission, and Roman Vishniak, a different kind of Holocaust photographer, which we actually had a program about. So thank you so much for being with us. Judith, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm unmuted. It really is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the gracious introduction. I'm just, here we go. Moving on to my PowerPoint. So I was asked today to talk about anti-Semitic photographs, but that raises the first really basic question. What exactly is an anti-Semitic photograph? Because unlike artwork or sculpture, it's not supposed to be a creative creation, but rather a reflection of reality and a more neutral type of artistic endeavor. So, let's see. And in fact, when we talk about anti-Semitic photographs, what first comes to our mind often are not photos where the photo itself is anti-Semitic, but rather they're portrayals of anti-Semitism that are done by a sympathetic eye, often Jewish. And this is one of the many photographs taken of the Tree of Life Memorial that was put up right after the horrible massacres, which always spoke to me a lot because I grew up around the corner from Tree of Life. But is that type of photograph in itself anti-Semitic? It's a picture of anti-Semitism. And my work at the Holocaust Museum has made me focus a lot on real anti-Semitism, obviously. And the fact is that there are anti-Semitic photos, and we want to see what makes a photograph anti-Semitic. The other thing is, like the French saying, the more things change, the more things stay the same, or in Hebrew, Ein chadash tachat hashemesh, there's nothing new under the sun. The fact is that you see the same tropes over and over again. A couple years back, the Holocaust Museum acquired a collection of 400 years of anti-Semitica. For those of you who want to see it, it's the Katz-Ehrenthal collection. It's all on our website. And when I acquired the collection, what struck in my mind is that it's the same tropes, it's the same images that appeared over centuries in almost every country in Europe, in the United States, that it all stays the same. Let me show you one example. The top two photographs of anti-Semitic carnival floats were from Germany in the 1930s. The bottom two were taken only a few years ago in Belgium. But you can see in both, there's the distorted picture of what is supposed a Jewish face here. On the bottom, Jews are compared to vermin and being rats. The association of Jews and money, all of this is very much the same. And if you were to just colorize the top two pictures, it would be hard to tell what was taken back in the 1930s and what's more recent. And with that in mind, what I want to do is use my background in Holocaust photography to analyze types of anti-Semitic photographs that we see today. The first type of photograph is a benign photo with a malevolent caption. And I have two photos here, and they're lovely photos. How can these be anti-Semitic? The one on the left almost looks like a Roman Vishniac picture. It's really beautifully composed. Pathos, I like that photo a lot. The one on the right, I'd say from a photographic perspective, is a little less polished, but it resembles the type of photo we see in our family photo albums that we can all relate to. So how could these photos possibly be anti-Semitic? And the answer is the caption. I don't know who took these pictures, but I know where they were published. They were both published in Julius Streicher's vile anti-Semitic publication, Der Stürmer. Here, this one that I say looks like a Roman Vishniac picture says, father and son celebrate Yom Kippur. Their devilish faces speak of the meanness of their race. And the one of, is it not coming down? For some reason, yeah, here we go. Of the family celebration, it's a 50th anniversary, and Der Stürmer said they breed like rabbits. Isaac and Sarah celebrate their golden wedding anniversary. The descendants and relatives attended the family celebration. All are united in their shared hatred of non-Jews. So here you take a nice photograph and turn it on its head. Now, I wanted to talk about that, but I was having trouble finding a contemporary example of it. And then anti-Semitism pops its ugly head. And I saw just about a month ago, this photo appeared in a newspaper in New Jersey. The photo itself is interesting from a composition point of view. You can see that the emphasis is on the Moderna vaccine. It's of a nurse giving out a vaccine, and she herself is a little blurry, but it's a nice photo. Can't complain about the photo. Where they got into trouble was with the caption. Effing hot nurse, and in the original, they did not say effing, they spelled it out. A total Jap loads a syringe with a dose of Moderna, COVID-19, and Lakewood, New Jersey. Okay, the second type of anti-Semitic photograph is what I call selection bias, Judentypen, typical Jew. This photograph was taken by Walter Genevine. Walter Genevine was the Nazi administrator of the Łódź ghetto. He was in charge of economic productivity of the ghetto. He also was an avid amateur photographer and one of the first people to experiment with color photography. And he took hundreds of photographs of the ghetto, including photographs of children, photographs of women, and some of them are actually rather nice if you didn't know who he was. And even this photograph, there's a lot of pathos. If you look at the eyes, you can make it a very sympathetic picture. However, what's interesting is that with all the photographs he took, the ones of children, the ones of women, group pictures, the ones that he chose to label Judentypen, a typical Jew, were only Orthodox men in a cappotto with a beard. Those are the typical Jew. The others were not typical. And one thing the Nazis did a lot was to look for the people they felt were the most typical and then to extrapolate based on that. And here's a photograph pre-war Poland, and the commentary is scum of humanity, not in the wildest fantasies. Wildest of fantasies, is it possible to picture the kind of havoc these criminals would wreak if we ever allow them in our land again? Well, the man in the center had what the Nazis wanted to consider the most typical Jewish face, and therefore used him as the model for their posters for the anti-Semitic film Der ewige Jude, the Eternal Jew, so that everyone would know that this is what a Jew is supposed to look like. Was that only Nazi Germany, or is there anything similar today? Well, last summer, lots of us probably saw what happened to a photograph of Joel Ossoff, now senator from Georgia. He does not look like Der ewige Jude. He doesn't look like a stereotypical Jew. So what they did is they elongated his nose. It's rather subtle. And then they put him together with Chuck Schumer, another Jew, and talked about buying the election, one other anti-Semitic trope. So it's the manipulation and the caption together that turns what would be a rather nice photograph of Joel Ossoff over here into an anti-Semitic image. And the combination of Ossoff with Schumer with the caption leads to juxtaposition, to create idea of Jewish world conspiracies, Jews controlling the economy, Jews controlling power. Here we have the older example. It's from an exhibit in France under the occupation called The Jews in France. And we have several well-known Jewish personalities, Louis Dreyfus, Levi, somebody from the Rothschild family. Each of the portraits in and of itself is not anti-Semitic. They're headshots. It's putting them together with the caption that the Jews are the ones controlling France's economy. Jews are reaching out. Jews are the malevolent players behind what's going on in the world. What's the equivalent? George Soros. And here in this one, it's George Soros who, in the mind of the people who put this together, is responsible for last year's race riots, responsible for what they feel was bringing down America. So again, it's not the photo of Soros, it's a headshot, but it's the juxtaposition of everything else, putting it in a different context. So another example, these two are illustrations, and you'll see they're not photographs, why I'm including them. Here we have Baron Rothschild as an octopus, and this cartoon that's also supposed to be, I'm not sure who it is, but you can see the Jewish star, some Jewish banker, and they're both as octopuses, trying to strangle the world. And why am I including a cartoon when it's not a photograph? Well, almost identical image. Again, George Soros as an octopus strangling the world. Whoever did the second one should be prosecuted for plagiarism, if nothing else. It's almost identical to this early cartoon from Nazi Germany. And now I want to come to the last example, which I'm calling celebratory anti-Semitism. Selfies then and now. And these are photographs of anti-Semitic activities, but unlike the Memorial for Tree of Life, which is one by a sympathetic photographer showing the effect of anti-Semitism, this is celebratory anti-Semitism. People involved in the action taking pictures of themselves, not with any shame, but with pride. These two photos were both taken in Poland right after the invasion. And you can see they're posing for the camera. Nothing shameful in their mind about what they're doing. It's celebratory. Shaving the beards and payas of Orthodox Jews while they're posing for the camera. And that's the predecessor to today's selfies that came with the invention of the iPhone. Well, we all saw this photograph, Mr. Camp Auschwitz at the Capitol just this January. And again, no shame, posing for the camera. The man in the Camp Auschwitz t-shirt isn't trying to hide the fact that he's wearing an anti-Semitic anti-Semitic shirt, but he's celebrating the fact. He's posing for the photo in a way that everyone can see Camp Auschwitz and making a joke out of the Holocaust. So that brings us to the end. Is there any good news? And as we see, there's a lot to be depressed about. My kids say that I'm obsessed, maybe too obsessed with anti-Semitism. And if anybody wants to do this exercise, this is how I found the Soros pictures. It's a pretty depressing thing to do. You do a Google image and type in the name of any well-known Jew, and you'll get images, photos manipulated that'll make your blood run cold. So lots to be depressed about. But despite that, there is good news. We saw the Lakewood nurse with the anti-Semitic caption. We saw the image of Joel Ossoff. But in both cases, there was a public outcry and they were removed from the publication almost immediately. And that's important. This isn't like Der Stürmer, where the photos remain for public view and are archived. There is still huge shame and stigma in mainstream media, if you want to use it, for publishing these type of images. And when people pointed out and protest, the images in both of those cases came down almost immediately. The other thing to remember is that photos are a two-edged sword. They can be taken for one reason and used for another. This is probably the best known Holocaust photo. We've all seen it all over. And we see it as the illustration of the suffering of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. But why was it taken? It wasn't taken to be a sympathetic photo to the Jews, but rather it's part of something called the Stroop Report, which celebrates the suppression of the Warsaw Ghetto. It was done to show how the last Jews of Warsaw were rounded up. It was only later that it became a photo where the focus is on the suffering of the Jews and not of the celebration of the suppression of the ghetto. Now, over the years, many people have come forward saying they can try to figure out the identity of the little boy. And there have been several attempts to identify him, and he's really become the iconic victim of the Holocaust. None of these attempts was ever successful. And in my own mind, the fact that we don't know who the boy is why the photo is so iconic. He can represent the 1.5 million victims because he's still anonymous. However, one person was conclusively identified, and we know for sure, and that is this man over here, it's backwards, with the gun. That is SS Rotenführer Joseph Bloch. And on the basis of the identification, he was arrested, charged with war crimes, and hanged. So a photo that began for the purpose of celebrating the suppression of the Warsaw Ghetto ended up being evidence. And without making comparisons to modern day politics, because I think that's obscene whenever anybody tries to say, oh, this is just like the Holocaust. No, it's not. You have to separate the two. But we have seen how some of these celebratory pictures from in January, like Mr. Camp Auschwitz, that was the basis under which they were later arrested. So once a photograph is out there, it can be used for a variety of purposes. And I think we need to be vigilant to anti-Semitic photos. They're being published Even today, as we speak, we need to be aware, we need to protest so they come down when we see them. But it's also important to remember, in many ways, it's not like the Holocaust. There are consequences. People do want to take these down. And as Deborah Lipstadt so nicely says, while we look at this, we need to balance the joy with the oi and not concentrate just on the bad. And with that, thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was just so, so terrific, Judith. Thank you so much. I think I am speaking, I don't see any questions in the chat room yet, but I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone when I say that you just in such a short time gave us really 500 years of history that's continuing. So thank you. And I'll just throw in a question, which is this is very much photographic literacy. And what if you were to, let's say, design a course, a curriculum for schools, what would that look like? How would you go about, and beyond schools, how can we educate the public to be more cognizant of photography, more literate?
I think one is to try to figure out why a photo was taken. Most photographs, especially now with iPhones, are just, taken casually. But if it's a press photo, why was it taken? How was it captioned? Another thing is to check for manipulation. And that's something that we think of as a recent phenomenon, and certainly 100% easier now that you have Photoshop, that you can make photos change into anything. But even I'm going to go back to screen share. This isn't why I showed the photo. But let's see, can I go backwards? Ooh. Previous. Here we go. If you look carefully, somebody was blocked out of that photo. And this photo's always been a mystery. I have no idea who blocked it out. But this is to show you that photos have been manipulated from way back when. And that's the first question that you have to ask, I'd say. Is
which photo was, can you show us which photo had somebody blocked out? Was the one on the left?
Over here, can you see a shadow? It's almost as if there's a ghost. I'm circling it with my cursor. So I think that one of the questions you need to ask when analyzing photos is this in fact reality? Are there any documents you can look at it, say, here it's blocked out? Now the problem with modern Photoshop is it's more seamless. You don't see this shadow. I think also there's the question of rushing to say why a photo was taken if we don't know. So those are sort of basic questions that you need to ask when looking at a photo. Not sure if that answers, but that's a start.
By all means. Let me just see if there's any. There you go. Would anyone like to ask a question?
Somebody direct messaged, except for the selfies, have those who have distorted recent photos that were published received penalties, or were they prosecuted? And I also want to add to that question this whole concept of the deep fakes, where videos can, it's very hard to tell if they've been altered. So
so the case, I don't think it was prosecution, but I say the one with the Joel Alsop, they did publicly apologize. And it was, it wasn't my fault, it was somebody else. That person was somebody else. Nobody wanted to claim credit for it. So there is a stigma. The deep fake, I find personally so scary, because we all want to say seeing is believing. And now you can alter reality in all sorts of ways. And I'm not enough of an expert on, modern technologies to see how you can do it, but I find it incredibly scary. With old photos that have been manipulated, you can go back to the negative. You can see if somebody penciled in with the development something else. There are ways to forensically test. There are probably people who are much more sophisticated with computers than I am who might be able to do some forensic testing on deepfakes. Certainly nothing I can do. And it's horrifying because you see something and it's human psychology. I saw it, it has to be true.
Someone else is asking, so what is the best way to use the horrifying evidence of the Holocaust and the other anti-Semitic images and other anti-Semitic atrocities to develop allies and fight effectively the new forms of anti-Semitism, whether it's anti-Zionism, whatever is coming up these days?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think one is that you have to be aware of original captions, how things were used, and always fight back. So one example that came across my desk when I was working at the Holocaust Museum was somebody said they wanted to do an exhibit on the Warsaw Ghetto. And we said, sure, great. And we're in the photo distribution business, and we gave them photographs. Then I thought that was a pretty routine thing. And I got an email from one of our donors in Canada, where it was shown, and said, what on earth did you do? That their idea of the exhibit on the Warsaw Ghetto was to say how the Warsaw Ghetto was the same thing as Gaza. And, it's a good sign as I, went cold. What we did, we were able to get them to take it down. And they put a big cease and desist by order of the Holocaust Museum. But photos are being not only manipulated, but used for the wrong purpose. And we saw some of that, of the juxtaposition of people saying, okay, and especially with the Holocaust, everyone wants to be a victim and forgetting, and there's legitimate, true suffering around the world. And Jews need to be empathetic and sympathetic to other people's suffering, but not everything is the Holocaust. In fact, I would say, other than the Holocaust, nothing's the Holocaust. And I think we have to be vigilant to say, yes, your cause may be real, but this is not the Holocaust. And when we see these things, to say, no, this picture was taken for a certain reason, but it's something that people do a lot of.
You're saying we are the warriors against it in some ways.
Yeah.
I am curious about one thing. You had mentioned in passing some photos that are online at the Holocaust Museum on the website.
Okay, so that was the Katz Ehrenthal, and it's not just photographs, but it's anti-Semitica, and it includes little statues, which artistically can be quite nice. The content, though, is horrific, of comparing Jews to pigs. This comparing Jews to pigs and vermin repeats time and time again. We see it, that first photo that I showed you of the float in Belgium where they made pigs out as rats. That's one. Jews and money, blood libel, and it comes time and time again. If you go, I can pull up something that we did. It's the Katz Ehrenthal collection. If you want to learn more about it, apologize for take me 1 second to find it, and then I'll show it to you.
Okay, and I just want to also say that if Bruce wants to ask his question, he can unmute himself.
Yeah, hi. While you're looking at that, I have an overall question that I don't want to simplify this issue because there are some incredible egregious pictures like the Camp Auschwitz and what happened in Belgium, but a lot of the other ones are so subtle and the news cycle comes and goes so fast that isn't it sometimes worse to put attention on these subtle things? And I know that you can modify pictures and do all this work, but sometimes it's just easier and better to just let the news cycles go because it comes and goes so fast, rather than we put such attention on every one of these issues. It just seems that it doesn't work to our advantage to put attention on very subtle comments on anti-Semitism, and that we should only focus on the bigger ones. And maybe
Uh,
that's not popular, but that's sort of my view.
I think there's some truth to it. I think Jews are good at crying wolf. Um, and that's real. I leave it for the experts, from ADL and to talk about where you have to draw the line. Just as I said, not everything is the Holocaust. Not everything is something worth talking about. I do think that in the case of, the Lakewood nurse, it was inappropriate. And the person, when he was called to task, he said, "Well, I was drunk that night." And gave a sort of weird apology. It violated journalistic standards also, and it was something that was handled by his own bosses. But no, I think that your point, though, is well taken. That at some point you have to say, "Is this a battle worth fighting?" And just not everything, Holocaust, not everything is tree of life, and there is some truth to that.
Are there some other questions?
And I'm having some computer difficulties, so
You know what?
I'm.
If you send us the link, we'll send the link out to everybody who participated today.
Okay, that'll be
and
easier.
And is there any kind of guided tour of that information on the website, or is it all just
Yeah, there's a little curator's corner that I did about the history of these images and what's in them. And that's the link I'm going to send to you, a description of the collection.
There's also a question that somebody who lives here in Greenwich has original photos from Poland around 1930 with family papers. Does the museum collection, are they interested in looking at these or wanting these?
Possibly. So here I'm going to modify it. If the family stayed in Poland and was affected by the Holocaust, then absolutely, we collect pre-war photographs of victims, because we strongly feel that you can't understand the Holocaust without understanding what was lost. If they immigrated to the United States before the Holocaust, then these type of papers would be of more use to a place like EVO.
The EVO Institute. So can you just tell me where, I want to type it into the chat, where would somebody send information about families that did stay in Poland or Eastern Europe during the Holocaust?
Right. Then write to my wonderful colleagues who are still there, and you can do it at curator@ushmm.org.
USA.
USH for United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, ushmm.org.
Okay. Oh, I meant to send that to everyone, but I private messaged it, so that's not helpful. Let me do that again. And okay, so that's for family photos and papers for people who stayed, and the other ones could go to the YIVO Institute. Let me just put that name in the chat so
and
people hear the difference.
And you put that in an email?
And we will put that in an email.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm
along with the link that Judith will send us to the collection online. And there is one last question, which is, do you think that the Berlin Memorial of the Holocaust, and I'm assuming there are many memorials, but I'm assuming it's the one with the slabs, is sufficient to sensitize the present German people to the crimes perpetrated by their ancestors?
It's another really tough one. I'll be honest, I have mixed feelings, and I'm speaking here as a private individual. I mean, I'm no longer a full-time employee at the museum, but this is not Museum Voice. I'm bothered sometimes when people use those stela for sunbathing, and I'm not sure. I have problems with that memorial of the outside. However, what most people don't know is that there's a wonderful, very, very poignant exhibit underneath that most visitors do not go to, that is very, very well done. The other thing, though, about Germany is it's not the only memorial site. The Jewish Museum has a large Holocaust section. All of the camps, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, all have memorial exhibitions. So I think it's mixed. And then my own view is that the most poignant, and this is a very, very personal reaction, and I know that other people disagree. For me personally, the most poignant memorials in Germany are the Stolpersteine, which are all over, these little stumbling blocks, tombstones that point out every house where a Jew used to live and the name of the Jew and when they were deported, because it really pulls it down in a personal way when you don't expect it. You're walking down the street and all of a sudden you come across the Stolpersteine. So I think that you need to balance the large memorial, which some people adore, other people dislike, with many, many other types of memorials that they have. And if you go to Berlin, again, take the time to go below, because the exhibit underneath the Stele is really fantastic.
Having been there, we did a mission to Berlin, and that's the one that follows the 5 families, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's amazing. And so, you know, Laura was gonna close out our program, and before she does that, I really want to thank you for a really stellar and very provoking presentation. Like, it really sort of opened my eyes to the 3 or 4 different ways in which photography is used, you know, and can be used in dual purposes. Yeah. So, Laura.
And I'll, of course, just thank you again and again, and particularly since I call you Judy. When we first spoke, probably late fall, this was actually a new angle for you, and of course it was dipping into your quarter century of expertise in general, with particularly the Holocaust. But I just want to say, and I'm sure everyone agrees, that your depth of insight and expertise in this, bringing up to the contemporary, is just so profound and so exciting. And thank you so much for lending that expertise to us. And we'd love to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to come. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed meeting all of you.
So thank you, and thank you again to Lois and Kel, and we'll see you next week.
And yes, I just want to say to everybody else who's still on that we have one more program next week at 7:30 p.m. The Alternate History of Anti-Semitism and Fascism in American Culture, which focuses very much on the types of things you're seeing on Netflix now, The Watchmen, The Man in the High Castle, things like that, you know, with Gabrielle Rosenfeld. So if you want to sign up for that, shoot us an email. We'll send you the sign-up link, and then we will reconvene in the fall. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.